Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Orange Stage at Event Tech Live for the first day of our in-person event. Thank you very much for joining us. My name's Craig. I'm hosting this stage today. So, as I said, thank you very much for joining us. We've already had an amazing session looking at sustainability, and we've got a second one following up very shortly. I would just like to touch on a couple of bits of housekeeping. Probably the best audio experience you'll get here is by listening through the headsets. Obviously, with COVID protocols, if we can ask you to leave them on your chair when you leave, they'll get cleaned and replaced ahead of the next session. We're also going to be taking questions, but we're going to be taking them through the Glisser platform. The QR code on screen behind me will give you the ability to sign up for that and log questions. If you want to type in the URL, it's glsr.live/ETL21. We'll be running this session for about 30 minutes. Matt has got an amazing presentation to give you, and then we'll finish up with some questions. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Matt Gray, Director from Event Decision.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's very strange looking at a bunch of masks. How's the audio? Real good, so we can hear? Awesome. Okay, so real numbers in sustainability, and we will come to that in just a sec. But who am I? I'm Matt Gray. I'm the founder of Event Decision. We have a range of predictive tools for event planners. So you can see them there: connect, track, and predict. Each look at a different section of event planning. But we are here today to talk about track, which is our suite of carbon or emissions or impact measurement tools for event planners. Just by way of credentials, we have a number of partners, some of whom are here today, and we're delighted to see them. And those are coming on board fairly quickly. So, to the matter in hand. Real numbers in event sustainability. So we're not going to talk about COP26, we're not going to talk about what Boris and the world leaders are saying. We're not going to say very much about what Rishi is saying right now. Conveniently leaked last night about some of the things that we support with from an event planning perspective. But we are going to talk about real numbers, real money, measurement, tons, and so forth. And there's quite a lot to cover. As you'll appreciate, sustainability is a big topic. So we're going to move along fairly quickly. As Craig said, there's plenty of time for questions at the end, or come and grab us or see us at eventdecision.com. So who's this talk for? Well, anyone who is involved in the planning of events. So if you're a brand planner, an in-house corporate planner, agency, you'll forgive the pictures there, they're a little bit stereotypical. But if you're involved in planning events and managing venues, or indeed the platforms, which are now an integral part. And this will not be the first time that we have a look at money. I know we were just preceded by a talk about the passions and the motivations and sustainability on a global and planetary scale. We're going to look a little bit more about the financial and the way in which that filters through to event planners on the ground. So 86%, why number 86%? HSBC ran a survey last year of more than 10,000 companies. 86% of those reported they expected to see an increase in their sales in the next 12 months as a result of their sustainability performance. Now, of course, not all these are events business, and why would events businesses care? Because no business is a silo, and we all work in conjunction with our supply base and our customers. So, as usual, there is a selection of incentives to make this stuff happen. Let's call it the carrot and stick. The carrot is relatively easy. Good morning to Ernst & Young friends out there. All these wonderful brands, these wise, sage and experienced brands are telling us that revenues, margins and profitability can all be increased by adoption of sustainable business techniques. I was going to put a couple of quotes up, but there are so many. You can literally Google those brand names with the relevant terms and their reports will come up. And they say things like this: creating the digital systems to monitor and operate tomorrow's low carbon infrastructure could generate revenues of 120 billion for UK-based businesses in the period up to 2030. Brilliant. We're in events, we're in tech. 120 billion sounds like a lot of money to me. So what does that mean for us on the ground, organising events on behalf of some of those big brands? And here comes the stick part. again, there are a huge number of brands. This information is all out there, it's all public on the web, but I've picked two that hopefully we know that some of us have or want or will organise events for, be they in person, hybrid or virtual, in the next couple of years. And if you can't see that on the screen, I'll read them briefly. So this is Salesforce on their procurement portal. We recommend collaborating with your corporate sustainability team, as it will become part of renewals. We will only work with you if you adopt a sustainable approach, say Salesforce. BT, the sustainability assessor, means we can extend the benefit and learnings. This simple tool helps suppliers measure how sustainable they are compared to the best in the world. So not just these two brands, we're going to have picked probably any out of the ether, consumer brands, B2B brands that we all work with and consume all the day, all the time, are adopting this and forcing it through their supply chain. That will come to us as planners. And why is it happening now? Those of us a bit longer in the tooth remember 2006, there was a spike in sustainability talk and discussion amongst clients and agencies, and then the same in 2012 with the publication of ISO 21221. So why 2021? Why now? 3 letters. ESG. Environmental, social and governance. It's the way investors measure companies in a number of different ways, but we're going to look at the E today and their performance and their supply chain. I'll give you a real world example. This summer I rang my pension guy and I said, please can you move my funds? Now, I work in events, so it's about this much. Can you move my pension pot please into ethical and sustainable funds? Let's imagine 1 million people do that as well. That's a lot of money. And he goes to his professional institutional investor and says, I've got this huge pot and we need to put it somewhere good for companies that are scoring well in ESG. So companies are working really hard to make sure that they score well. There's a lot of different ways to reporting. It's a whole different world, investor relations. But it is happening. 85% of investors consider the ESG factors in their investments. Question, because we're not, well, we are in the City of London, but what does this mean for us? The first thing is, we are absolutely not just allowed, but have to continue to create, design and deliver great events. That's our job, after all. It doesn't mean that we are not allowed to create any emissions. Now, here's a term that for any parents amongst us usually means it's a day at home because the kids have to stay away from school. In events in setting is effectively the planning process with sustainability in mind. Try to mitigate your emissions. So if we go back a slide, it doesn't matter that some emissions may be created. However, we are supposed to, ethically and professionally, to minimize those. There's some really good news. Here's the tech part. There are tools that are available to help us do this. There are tools, such as those from Event Decision, that allow us to measure the effectiveness of our planning in this respect. I'm not going to bang on about virtual and hybrid. We're at one now. Clearly, moving an event from 1,000 people on person to 1,000 people online has an effect on the impact and the measurements. And there's a plethora of tools available for on the ground. So I'm sure they're all very worthwhile tactics, the plastics, the carpet, the LED lighting, the renewable power, and so forth. There are a lot of ways for us to reduce the impact. These are all measurable. The question is that we have to do it early. There's not little point in ETL measuring the footprint of this event, virtual the last 2 days, live today and tomorrow, and I think virtual after that, after the event. Why don't we do it at the beginning of the planning process? There are so many ways in which we can measure. You won't be able to see those, but there are, in fact, in our measurement tool, there are over 40 measurement criteria that we can look at your events in advance. Yesterday we were measuring events for June next year for a massive telco via an agency. Yesterday we were measuring a virtual event for 250 people in 3 different ways. A hybrid event, shall I say, fully virtual, hybrid and mostly in person. And analysing that. We don't expect actually all events to use sustainable criteria as the major planning tool. We can compare destinations, we could compare the formats of live and hybrid events. And then expect suddenly all event buyers to go, oh, great, well, we'll go 100% virtual because, and if we want to have an in-person event, we'll do it at Birmingham because it's the easiest place for everyone to get to. Events are still going to happen across the nation, across Europe and across the world. Data exists in all these criteria for that. And it's not always the prettiest method. This is a back-end view of the tool that Event Decision uses called Track Footprint. It has its complex moments, but it's not that complex. Standard units of measurement exist for all that stuff. We know the emissions associated with different types of flights, different lengths, and back, middle, and front of the plane. Sorry, we're at events, we'll be at the back of the plane. We know the emissions associated with hotel stays, where our VIPs stay on Park Lane and we stay in Premier Inn down the road. I'm joking. But there are standard units of measurement. It's usually tons of CO2e. The E means equivalent, so we can then include methane and nitrous oxides and so forth, and put them all together and come out with an output. This is an output from a track footprint report that was run a couple of weeks ago probably. We've got a total tons associated with the event, broken down into, well, you won't want 40 categories, we tend to use 7. But that's a real number associated with a real event. It looks like a fairly chunky accommodation element to that. But it helps you guys as the planners look at that and go, wow, it's a real number. And there is a dollar sign or a pound sign attached to a real number of CO2. There's a massive carbon market out there. So this is where it starts costing clients money when they say, we're going to go carbon neutral. Haven't heard anything on the radio that, apart from big brands talking about carbon neutrality, net neutral, or whatever they want to call it in the last few days because of COP. But what we offer also is a benchmark. You can look at your event in the planning stage before you've booked your venue even, before you've chosen your platform, and say, actually, what is the impact of that? Allow us to measure it, and you can then say, oh, we're about there. It's not exact, it's not a global standard, it's an internal benchmarking from the Event Decision, but you can look at the emissions per person and say, actually, is that in line with what other people are doing? Or should we be nearer down here on an emissions per person basis? Every event's different. Not going to be in the top line there for everything, nor need you be in the bottom line there for everything. And actually, it's fairly common sense. Local events have smaller emissions usually than regional, and smaller still than global. And this applies to the money attached to it. So number one, our job is to mitigate, but we can only mitigate if we've measured the effects of our events. And number two, offset. It's a funny old word. It means lots of different things to different people. Some people love it. Some people are vehemently against offset for a number of reasons. We won't go into that today, but there's effectively 2 types of offset that you can purchase. Removal or sequestration, which is your tree planting and things like that suck the carbon that's already in the air out. And then avoidance, that's the second type. That is your solar and your wind and so forth that avoid those things going out in the first place. Because a ton of CO2 is quite big. PwC put an orange version of that in Trafalgar Square this week. It's quite a lot of CO2. If you think that a global meeting for 1,200 people flying from all over the world into The Hague or Amsterdam or somewhere like that, big hub, can be north of 1,500 of those on flights and accommodation alone. It's a lot of space, it's a lot of CO2. And what does it cost? Depends on where you buy it from, what type of project it is and so forth, but we have seen prices for carbon offset in both avoidance and sequestration between £8 and £24. So when you think of that big global meeting with 1,500 tonnes at £20 a tonne, it's quite a lot of money. And it's our job as planners, with the tools that we have, that we can provide, to minimise and to mitigate that, both from a planetary and environmental perspective, but also from a financial perspective. And as Mr. Sunak is saying, I believe, this morning, and they're setting up an enhanced channel for some of the larger companies in this country to force that. There's me with my pension, to my pension guy, to the investor, looking at the companies. The internal auditors are going, oh, we do this much on flights, we do this much in our manufacturing of our widgets, and we do that much in our sales and our shop floors and so forth. They're coming for us. They're going to come for the events teams and saying, hang on, what have you guys been doing all year? You've been flying people around the world to these cool events. Or you've well done, you've moved hybrid. How much have you saved? You know, what can we tell our audience? You will be asked for this information internally, or if you're an agent, you should be telling your client this information proactively. So, really quick summary. Measure, plan to mitigate, minimize your offset, and then offset it. Now, our part is in the measurement. These tools are there, they're ready to go. They're certified, they're accredited, you get a stamp, and there's a range of tools available from Red Decision, basic, medium and high, and you get different outputs associated with each of those. But you can do this today if you wish. If you're a client, you can measure and report that almost within your organization. If you're an agent, you can take this to your client. At the moment, it's a competitive advantage. If you take this in your RFP and say, hey, we're great, we've been around for a long time, our creative is, our credentials are, our financial stability is amazing after lockdown, and actually we are really into sustainability because we know this is important to you, brand. And we're so into it, here's the measurement of what we're proposing you do. So that, nice and quickly, we'll get through it, because there's usually a few questions about this stuff, is numbers and sustainability. Craig.
Thank you very much. Fantastic. Really interesting presentation, and followed on perfectly from the one that happened before. So I think that's been well scheduled by the team at ETL. As I said in my introduction, we are taking questions electronically. So if anyone does have any questions, if you want to fire them over, please feel free to. The URL again for that is glsr.live/ETL21. So if you've got any questions and you want us to answer those, either if you're in the room or if you are watching remotely, please feel free to raise those questions for us. We'll start with the first question we have. That's a logical place to start. So I think this is a common kind of misconception that making your event more sustainable is going to be more expensive, and particularly off the back of a terrible 18 months for the events industry, something more expensive is a little bit scary. So do you think that's true? And if it isn't true, what can we do to sort of dispel those beliefs and thoughts as well?
The short answer is no, it needn't be. I'll elaborate slightly. We measured an event, it's an event for a brand team in January, 250 of them. Traditionally they'd get together and they do, travel from all over the UK into a central location and have 2 or 3 nights and probably a bit of a hoolie at night and some entertainment and some sessions and take over a hotel and all that stuff. That costs the brand a lot more money than the hybrid version that client has chosen to do. So it makes sense to all of us by now that moving hybrid and virtual will save money. Now I know virtual events needn't be necessarily cheaper than live and in-person events, but we're all getting better at this. There's plenty of platforms in this building today who will tell you that it needn't be. And we measured the impact of a hybrid event for 250 people, and it was, let us say, very low. The maximum offset, I think when they had like 25 people there and 225 online, it's about £60. That's on the measurement side. I know my predecessor, Anna from We Are Isla, was on this stage an hour ago, and she hopefully said things around print. There are print solutions for these things that cost less, that are fully recyclable and last longer than traditional PVC in printing. So there are lots of things out there. I'm sure I don't see any plastic around. Well done, guys. So no, it needn't cost more at all.
Amazing. I'm going to raise a question that's not on there, which is just one that's come to me as I've been speaking. So I run a festival, and I think the virtual festival is probably a way off. And this year we've certainly seen kind of live events springing back to life and people loving them as well. So do you think kind of the sustainability model is more tailored to conferences and business events, or can it kind of transcend the whole of the events industry and apply equally to a variety of different types of show?
I think absolutely encapsulates the whole range of events generally, B2B, B2C, corporate festivals, theatres, we all know how many different types of events, and that brings its own problems in governance and all stuff that we've seen over the last 18 months. But if within those 40 plus criteria, we can, I won't say easily, but we can measure the impact of every different part of your festival. And then you can see the parts where you have the greatest impact in terms of environmental and emissions rather than wow engagement impact. And then you can decide which bits will make most sense to do something about and try and mitigate that impact. So yes, around festivals, absolutely.
Brilliant. And the next question we've got on the screen now, what would you say is the most unique way to reduce your carbon? Everyone seems to say they do it, but how can you stand out from the majority?
Great question. Thank you, whoever you are. Won't be unique if we share it, will it? I think what we're coming to terms with, and we don't see that often, is a real good hard look at the format and the location of your event. So I mentioned that different destinations, even within this country, have different footprints, and obviously so does the live and virtual mix. We measured an event for a Formula One sponsor back in August, I think. And they were looking at two venues, one in central London and one in the home counties. Home counties, beautiful, country house, 5-star, you get the gist. London, glass monolith, not much character, but both fulfilled what they needed in terms of space and so forth. The difference was the delegate travel, which was enormous for 400 people. Everyone drives to the home counties. There was no train station. Everyone takes the tube to, it was near King's Cross, that venue. And so the impact in terms of environmental was massive and noticeable and significant. And the client actually made their decision on the basis of that, which was brilliant. Yes, we have to do all the tactical stuff around, there's no carpet here, great. Carpets, lights, plastic, food wastage is a really hard one. Nobody wants an empty buffet. Reusing assets. I would push you guys in the way of Chantal at Event Cycle for that. They're brilliant at reusing assets from events like this into local projects who want the stuff that most of the agencies have sitting in their storerooms, warehouses. It can be reused. That's probably still fairly unique, reusing all the assets. And then being brave enough to say to your stakeholder or your boss at the agency and say, we're going to propose something a bit different. This is what we're proposing. Make it, but on the basis of this. Naive enough to think that every decision is made on a sustainable basis. But this company sprung from a conversation with a big global tech brand who said, we want to start feeding it in. So, great question. There's no unique $1 million answer, but in many ways.
In the events industry and various different kind of parts of it, and again, it's just a bit of a general question. It can be really daunting if you're starting from a low base to tackle sustainability. You can go to it and just be scared by the measurements, scared by the techniques, the variety of conversations about it. Is there like a really easy, simple first step that an event organizer who's approaching this from a really low base level should take?
I guess that kind of comes into the, are we far from having a global standard or even a national standard? And we're all in this together, guys, because as event organizers, we've got associations for this, that, and the other. We've got JMEC, we've got AEV, AEO, and so forth. We've got agency-sponsored programs. We've got all sorts of different associations and rules and regulations. It's a little bit of a Wild West out there in sustainability. The one constant is the measurement piece. You don't mess with a ton of CO2e. It is established. There are huge EcoInvent 3.6, the world's largest open source carbon database. Information's all there. So that's a standard. It's what stamp you want that is difficult. And if you I did this for a presentation last week. I Googled net neutral event. You get 50 different logos up. How do you know which mean which? I'm sure they're all well-meaning, but in terms of a global standard for events, I think we're a little bit off, sadly. I think we will get there, and it will probably be more than one, but they'll probably be roughly equivalent to each other. Because there are people working really hard. And take a look at netzerocarbonevents.org, netzerocarbonevents.org. They seem to be ahead of the group, of the industry, in terms of it's very wide-ranging and includes a lot of stakeholders. They're not the only ones, but I've seen them cropping up in many, many places. So they may well come up, I hope they do come up with a standard, but as we all know, events take a human touch. That's why we're here. That's why we exist as an industry. Otherwise, we'd be using an app to organise events. So every event's different, so every measurement's different. So to have a standard, I'm asked all the time, what's the standard for a hybrid delegate? Like, how big is your event? It's tough.
Perfect, amazing, thank you very much. I think that pretty much brings us to the end of our questions. So I would just like to thank everyone for attending this session. Thank you for coming to the Orange Stage. Hopefully there'll be something for you to join us again later in the day. And finally, a massive thank you to Matt for a really interesting presentation. And yeah, hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.